The year was 1978, and Superman flew high at the box office.
More and more pictures.
But this story is about a different Man of Steel.
I suddenly became Bullet Man.
It is about to end.
No, Dennis Rainier was not a member of the Washington Bullets, but he is an athlete. And 40 years ago, you could say this Henrico man became somewhat of a celebrity.
Do you remember the shows To Tell the Truth? I was on that show, and nobody would believe the story.
An incredible story that began on an unusually warm November day in western Michigan. Then 28 years old, Dennis had traveled about 2 hours from his home in the city of Midland to Grand Rapids to participate in the Grand Valley Marathon. It was an important race.
And it was my fourth marathon. I was attempting to qualify for Boston. At the time, the qualifying time to be admitted was 3 hours. And I had already run 3 hours and 31 seconds, so I thought with training that was clearly possible to break the goal of 3 hours.
Despite the heat, things were going well until about the 10-mile mark.
I literally got knocked off my feet, and it felt like a rock or a brick had struck me.
Dennis immediately assumed that kids must have been throwing things at the runners, but looked around and saw no one. He then thought maybe he had been hit by a large branch, but there were no trees.
I put my hand up there, and it was just like in the cartoons where you see a big goose egg, a lump come out of somebody's head, and I had this big lump.
He was hurting, but he wasn't about to quit.
10 miles from the start, 16 miles, it didn't even occur to me to stop. I just had to look around and keep going.
Unfortunately, the mysterious injury took its toll.
I was groggy and I was wobbly, had a little trouble focusing my eyes, and again, no explanation.
So he picked up the pace and forced himself to power through.
Finally got to the finish line, struggled in 3:09. Pretty disappointed and kind of upset.
His Boston Marathon dreams dashed. Dennis was immediately greeted by his wife, who could tell that something was wrong.
And then she came over and said, "I thought you were going to break 3 hours today. What happened?" I said, I don't know, dear. I think somebody hit me with a brick. Look at this on my head."
They grabbed a hot dog, then walked over to the race doctor.
And the physician looked, and he peeled back the scalp and the hair a little bit and said, "I see something," and finally said, "I don't know, but I think maybe you've been shot."
That's right, shot with a bullet. His wife drove him to the hospital, and he says the nurses could not believe his story.
So they made me ride in a wheelchair, even though I'd already just run a marathon, down the hall. We had a examination room, and the physician, with some difficulty, was able to finally pry the bullet out.
Dennis Rainier ran 16 miles with a bullet lodged in his skull, and he lived to tell the tale. Coming up, we'll tell you what happened after police got involved, the eerie phone call he received a few weeks after the race, and how his 15 minutes of fame led to an invitation that he will never forget.
The Robert E. Lee Bridge. 6 lanes of concrete connecting downtown Richmond to the south side. And whether you're high above or down below, on a bright sunny day, it can provide spectacular views of the James River. But the Lee Bridge also has a dark side. Because there is a walking path next to the southbound lanes, over the years the bridge has attracted a number of men and women with thoughts of suicide. It happened again this past spring.
You literally never know what's going to be around the corner.
For Richmond police officers Daniel Raines and Aaron Henning, April 15th started out the same way as many others had.
The sun was coming up. It was a beautiful day.
At about 5 o'clock that morning, they started their patrol.
It was a Sunday, so we thought it was going to be kind of a slow day.
Things sped up just an hour later.
Call came in for a possible jump on the bridge.
An off-duty firefighter was driving home when he spotted a man who looked like he was preparing to jump. He called police, and Raines and Henning were sent to the scene. They shut down the lanes and started walking towards the man.
You could definitely tell he was in distress, crying, visibly upset.
CBS 6 obtained exclusive body camera footage of the incident.
He allowed us to get pretty close.
When they started talking to him, they learned he was suffering not just emotionally, but physically.
He stated that he had just walked out of MCV and walked right to the bridge, had suffered from seizures, all his life. He had, I think his grandmother's mother had passed away. Nobody pretty much there for him anymore.
To the officers, it was clear the man had already made up his mind.
This guy's like being on the opposite side of the railing. It's like that's the furthest I've seen somebody.
So yeah, that was definitely the oh crap moment.
You don't want to do it no more?
And they knew a jump would almost certainly be fatal.
It's probably maybe 2 foot of water or so, because you can see the rocks. I mean, it's a good long drop, and it's like he's not gonna walk away from that.
They decided to act.
Our priority was to save this guy's life.
They knew they were putting their own safety at risk.
You're not thinking about yourself at that point.
In the video, you can see Officer Henning silently orchestrate the rescue plan, motioning with his hands to both Officer Rains and the firefighter as to how they were going to grab the man.
I looked at both of them. We're like, the conversation ain't going nowhere. Made a nod, and sure enough, in sync, all three of us. The firefighter grabbed from behind. Me and him both put our arms out and pulled him over.
We got you, buddy. We got you, okay?
In just 2.5 minutes,
421, we got him.
It was just
All right, you're okay?
that quick.
it was all over.
Come on.
The officers took the man to Richmond Community Hospital, where he was voluntarily committed.
We literally were at the hospital for maybe like 4 hours or so,
After that, it was back to work.
and we literally came right back and started running calls again. So yeah, it's just another day, another call, and calls never stop.
The memories of that day haven't stopped either.
I don't think about it really, and like what could have happened till after. Then that's when it hit you like, oh.
On the job and at home, these officers have a lot of support.
My wife's a therapist, so yeah, it allows me to decompress and I can tell her pretty much anything.
And a sense of humor keeps the bond between these partners strong, especially during tough times.
What
My
happened on the
wife's
street.
my wife's not a therapist, so I talked to his wife.
Because of their bravery, Rains and Henning were recognized at this year's Valor Awards, a ceremony that honors the heroism of police and first responders. Each received a bronze award for going above and beyond the call of duty that day, high above the James River, when they gave a second chance to a man who had almost hit rock bottom. Both officers say they're appreciative of the awards, but
We don't do this to get recognized.
There's a lot of officers that do things on a daily basis that are just as good, if not better, than what we did that day.
We're going to be with you.
It's just
and
part of
and
it.
the public will never know about it.
I did 11 years the hard way, and I made it, so I know I'm strong.
the online confessional
You gon' see.
of Deverick Raekwon Gale,
He dumb, he ain't gonna make it. He going back to jail or a nigga gonna kill him.
an ex-con telling the doubters how he would prove them wrong.
Anybody who gets intimidated by your ability to be successful is not your friend.
That he was going to defy the odds and become a success.
I heard the gunshot says his body slipped and fell.
But police say Gale has already cost himself a shot of redemption in 2018.
Still holding out for you guys. Crazy, conscious, so crazy.
On January 2nd, a man named Devon Daniels is gunned down on Coulter Street in Richmond's Mosby Court.
Days Colter 18th and 1126.
Gale is quickly identified as the suspect. A month later, he is arrested. In the days that follow, we learn that Gale has a lengthy criminal record and had recently been released from federal prison. Some will say this is just another example of a violent criminal being given multiple chances to turn his life around and failing each time. Others will view it as an indictment of society where jobs and prospects are so scarce for felons that they often have no choice but to return to a life of crime.
Man, I honestly feel like I'm gonna be successful.
But this we know for a fact.
Man, I feel it in my gut.
Despite his optimistic tone on social media, Gale saw himself as a threat to society, and society has viewed him as a menace since he was just a boy. Known to his friends and family as Quan, Gale was just a high school student when his life of crime began. It was Thanksgiving, November 25th, 2004, when the 16-year-old would sit behind bars eating Thanksgiving dinner. He had been arrested for shooting into a Richmond home. Gale was later convicted, but most of his 10-year sentence was suspended, so within a few months he was back on the streets. Then in October of 2005, he would find himself on the wrong side of the law again, arrested for assaulting a police officer in Chesterfield's Meadowbrook High School. That case ended with another conviction, and though it only came with a 1.5-year prison sentence, it would be a long time before Gale would once again walk as a free man. On August 1st, 2006, a federal grand jury indicted him on one count of possession of a firearm by a convicted felon. Gale entered into a plea agreement with prosecutors and was sentenced to nearly 6 years in prison. And since he had violated the terms of his probation in Richmond, more time would be added on, and Gale would have to spend the next decade behind bars. But there was something else ordered by the judge. Upon his release, Gale would be required to participate in a mental health program to include anger management. Fast forward 10 years to 2017, Quan Gale is released from federal prison in June and moves into a halfway house. In late September, he moves in with a relative on the city's south side and placed on home confinement. Then on December 1st, he starts serving 3 years of a supervised release. 4 weeks later, a few days after Christmas, Gale is due to show up at a behavioral assessment center off High Oaks Road for a mental health assessment. He never shows up.
Police in Richmond are investigating the city's first homicide of the year.
Less than a week later is when Richmond police say Gale shot and killed Devon Daniels. Now he's back in jail, charged with conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. And we've learned that 4 years ago, he warned that something like this might happen. While digging through his case file, CBS 6 discovered a letter that Gale sent to Judge Robert Payne in April of 2014 when he had about 3 years left of his sentence. It was a letter written from solitary confinement, where Gale was waiting another disciplinary hearing for fighting with another inmate. According to Gale, it was the 6th such fight he'd been involved with in 2 years. In the letter, Gale tells the judge that he was mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually exhausted by his inability to control his anger and aggression. He complained that he was only being treated with an endless list of psych medications, which would keep him in a sedated state of mind but wouldn't treat the cause of his problems.
Here we go.
And he speculated his behavior could be the result of an abusive childhood, while also worrying that it might be genetic. Gale claims his biological father had been diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic. Near the end of his letter, Gale tells the judge that he could offer a monumental argument that he was more a detrimental threat to society at the moment than he was locked up 8 years prior. He closes by requesting that the judge have his prison sentence shortened and then have him committed to an intense inpatient mental health treatment facility. 2 months later, Judge Payne sends Gale and his attorney a reply, writing that he could not grant his requests because that court no longer had jurisdiction to amend his sentence. So Quan Gale remained in prison, but what could have happened if his letter foreshadowing future violence ended up in different hands? That's next.